Have you ever been excluded from something so important that it felt like your entire world shifted? Well, what if I told you about a woman who turned that exclusion into the ultimate power move? This is the story of how one text message led to the purchase of an entire restaurant, and how Christmas Eve became the night when justice was served as the main course. Trust me, you've never heard a revenge story quite like this one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Chen, and if you had asked me 3 months ago whether I believed in karma, I would have laughed. I'm 38 years old, I run my own digital marketing agency in Phoenix, Arizona, and I've always been the type of person who believes you create your own luck through hard work and determination. I'm practical, methodical, and I don't believe in waiting for the universe to fix things for you. But sometimes, the universe gives you exactly what you need to fix things yourself. I live in a beautiful adobe-style house in Scottsdale with my daughter Lily, who is 15 years old and the most incredible human being I've ever known. Lily isn't my biological daughter, and I've never pretended she was. She's the daughter of my heart, the child who came into my life when she was 7 years old, through circumstances that no child should ever have to endure. Her mother, my best friend from college, passed away from cancer, and her father had never been in the picture. There was no one else, no other family willing to step up, no relatives who wanted the responsibility of raising a grieving little girl. But I wanted her. I had always wanted her. From the moment Stephanie first showed me Lily's ultrasound picture, I felt connected to this child in a way that defied explanation. When Stephanie got sick, I was there for every doctor's appointment, every treatment, every sleepless night in the hospital. I was there when she made me promise to take care of Lily, and I was there when she took her last breath, holding both their hands as she passed peacefully in the early morning hours of a Tuesday in March. Lily came home with me that same week, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a worn teddy bear named Mr. Buttons that her mother had given her. She was quiet those first few months, processing grief in the way that only children can, with a mixture of resilience and heartbreak that amazed me every single day. She would sit in my kitchen doing homework while I worked on client campaigns, and gradually, slowly, she began to smile again. She began to laugh. She began to call my house our house, and eventually, she began to call me Mom. The adoption process was lengthy, but straightforward. I had a stable income, a clean background, check, and most importantly, I had Lily's trust and love. The day the judge finalized everything, Lily wore a yellow dress that Stephanie had bought for her 8th birthday, and she held my hand as we walked out of the courthouse as an official family. I took her to her favorite restaurant afterward, a little Mexican place called Rosita's where they knew our order by heart, and she told me that she felt like the luckiest kid in the world because she got to have 2 moms who loved her. That's when I realized that family isn't about biology or blood relations or legal documents. Family is about showing up. It's about being present for the big moments and the small ones, for the celebrations and the heartbreak, for the ordinary Tuesday nights and the extraordinary milestones. Family is about choice, commitment, and unconditional love. My biological family, however, had a different definition of family. My parents, David and Patricia Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan in their 20s and built a successful accounting practice in Phoenix. They valued tradition, hierarchy, and bloodlines above almost everything else. My older brother Kevin followed in their footsteps, becoming a CPA and marrying a woman they approved of, having 3 children who could trace their lineage back generations. My younger sister Amanda became a pediatric dentist, married her college sweetheart, and had twin boys who were the absolute apples of my parents' eyes. Then there was me, the middle child who had always been a little different, a little too independent, a little too willing to forge my own path. I had studied marketing instead of accounting, started my own business instead of joining the family practice. and remained single by choice rather than settling down with someone my parents deemed appropriate. They tolerated my choices, but they never quite understood them. And when I adopted Lily, their tolerance was tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't that they were cruel to Lily. They weren't overtly unkind or deliberately hurtful. They simply treated her as if she were temporary, as if she were a phase I was going through rather than my daughter. They would refer to her as Rebecca's little friend or the girl Rebecca is caring for, never using her name, never acknowledging her as their granddaughter. At family gatherings, they would ask about my business, my health, my plans for the future. But they rarely asked about Lily's school, her interests, or her well-being. Lily noticed, of course. Children always notice. She would watch my nephews run to their grandparents for hugs while she stood quietly beside me, waiting to see if anyone would acknowledge her presence. She would listen to conversations about family trips and holiday plans, understanding without being told that she wasn't included in the same way the other children were. She never complained, never asked why things were different for her, but I could see the questions in her eyes and the careful way she held herself around my family, as if she were a guest who didn't want to overstep her welcome. I told myself it would get better with time. I convinced myself that they just needed to adjust, that once they got to know Lily better, they would see what an amazing, intelligent, compassionate young woman she was becoming. I made excuses for their behavior and found explanations for their distance that didn't involve acknowledging the painful truth that they simply didn't consider Lily to be real family. For 8 years, I maintained this delicate balance. I would bring Lily to family events and watch her navigate the subtle exclusions with grace beyond her years. I would bite my tongue when my mother would fuss over Kevin's children while barely acknowledging Lily's presence. I would smile and nod when Amanda would share stories about her twins' accomplishments while ignoring Lily's honor roll certificates and art competition wins that I would try to share. Lily excelled in school despite everything. She was in advanced placement classes, played violin in the school orchestra, and volunteered at the local animal shelter every weekend. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was kind to everyone she met, had a dry sense of humor that could make me laugh until my sides hurt, and possessed an emotional intelligence that astounded me regularly. She had grown into a remarkable young woman, and I was proud of her every single day. But my family didn't see any of that. They saw an outsider, a disruption to their carefully constructed idea of what our family should look like. They saw someone who didn't belong, despite the fact that she had been part of our lives for more than half of her existence. They saw a reminder that I had chosen a different path, one that didn't fit their expectations or their definitions of acceptable family structure. I had built my business from nothing into a thriving agency with 12 employees and clients across the country. I had created a beautiful home filled with laughter and love. I had raised an incredible daughter who was preparing for college applications and dreaming about her future. I had accomplished everything I had set out to do and more, but somehow, in my family's eyes, I was still missing something essential because I had chosen love over biology, heart over tradition. The turning point came in November, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, when I received a text message that would change everything. It was in our family group chat, the one my mother had created to coordinate holiday plans and share family updates. The message was simple, direct, and devastating in its casual cruelty. It read exactly like this: Christmas dinner will be at Golden Dragon Restaurant this year, December 24th at 7 p.m. This is an adult family gathering only. We're looking forward to a peaceful evening with just the core family. Please confirm your attendance by December 1st. I stared at that message for a long time, reading it over and over again, trying to find some other interpretation that didn't involve the deliberate exclusion of my daughter. Adult family gathering only. Core family. The implications were crystal clear, even though my name wasn't mentioned specifically. This wasn't about age restrictions or venue limitations. This was about drawing a line in the sand and making it abundantly clear which side of that line Lily fell on. Lily was in her bedroom working on a history project when I received the message. She was 15 years old, hardly a disruptive child who couldn't handle an adult dinner conversation. She was articulate, well-mannered, and more mature than many adults I knew. The age restriction was a thin excuse for what this really was. A deliberate attempt to exclude her from yet another family gathering, this time the most important one of the year. I walked to her room and knocked gently on the doorframe. She looked up from her laptop, her dark hair falling across her face, and smiled at me with the same warmth that had gotten me through every difficult day for the past 8 years. She was working on a research paper about the civil rights movement, surrounded by library books and highlighted printouts, completely absorbed in learning about people who had fought for acceptance and equality. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat down on the edge of her bed and showed her the message without saying anything. I watched her read it once, then again, and then a third time. Her expression didn't change, but I saw something shift in her eyes, a resignation that broke my heart because it told me this wasn't a surprise to her. She had been expecting this. She had been waiting for the moment when the subtle exclusions became explicit, when the quiet dismissals became outright rejection. She handed my phone back to me and said, in a voice that was too calm and too mature for any 15-year-old, "They don't want me there." "That's okay, Mom. I understand. But it wasn't okay. It wasn't okay at all." And in that moment, looking at my daughter's carefully composed face as she tried to protect me from her own pain, I realized that I had been complicit in this treatment for far too long. I had been so focused on keeping the peace, on maintaining family relationships, on hoping things would eventually change, that I had failed to protect the most important person in my life from ongoing emotional harm. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "It's not okay. And you're right, they don't want you there. But here's what they don't understand. Where you're not welcome, I'm not welcome either. We're a package deal, Lily. We always have been." She looked at me with surprise, and for the first time in years, I saw hope flicker in her eyes. Hope that someone was finally going to stand up for her, that someone was finally going to choose her first, that someone was finally going to treat her exclusion as unacceptable rather than unfortunate, but understandable. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the moments I had let slide, all the times I had made excuses for behavior that was inexcusable, all the ways I had failed to protect my daughter from people who claimed to love me but refused to love her. I thought about the promises I had made to Stephanie on her deathbed, promises to protect Lily and love her, and make sure she always knew she was wanted and valued and cherished. I had kept some of those promises, but I had failed at others. I had loved her fiercely and protected her from many things, but I hadn't protected her from my own family's rejection. I had allowed her to be treated as lesser than, different from, temporary. I had prioritized keeping peace with people who didn't deserve it over defending the person who deserved it most. But that was about to change, because sometimes love isn't gentle. Sometimes love is fierce and protective and willing to burn down everything that threatens the people you care about most. Sometimes love looks like drawing boundaries so clear that they can't be misunderstood or ignored. And sometimes love looks like buying an entire restaurant just to make sure the people who hurt your child understand exactly what they've lost. The next morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. I had barely slept, my mind racing through years of accumulated hurt and frustration, replaying every moment when I should have spoken up but didn't. The alarm clock seemed especially loud at 6 a.m., cutting through the quiet of our house like a blade. I could hear Lily moving around in her room, getting ready for school with the same quiet efficiency she approached everything in her life. I found her in the kitchen, already dressed in her school uniform, her violin case sitting by the door, her backpack perfectly organized as always. She was pouring orange juice into 2 glasses, One for each of us, the way she had done every morning for the past 3 years. It was such a small gesture, but it represented everything I loved about her thoughtful, caring nature that never demanded recognition or thanks. "Good morning, Mom," she said, handing me my glass with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I could see the weight of yesterday's revelation still sitting on her shoulders, the careful way she was holding herself as if bracing for more disappointment. She had learned over the years to expect less from people, to protect herself from the sting of exclusion by not getting her hopes up in the first place. It broke my heart to see her like this, to know that she had been carrying this burden of feeling unwanted by my family for so long. How many times had she swallowed her hurt rather than tell me about it? How many times had she made excuses for their behavior in her own mind, trying to find reasons why she wasn't included that didn't involve accepting that they simply didn't want her there? "Lily," I said, setting down my glass and turning to face her fully, "we need to talk about what happened yesterday, about the Christmas dinner message." She tensed slightly, her shoulders drawing up in that familiar defensive posture she adopted whenever she sensed difficult conversation coming. "It's really okay, Mom. I understand why they would want just the adult family members there. Maybe I can spend Christmas Eve with friends or something. Sarah's family usually has people over." The fact that she was already making alternative plans, already trying to solve the problem by removing herself from it, made my chest tight with anger and sadness. She had learned to accommodate everyone else's comfort by shrinking herself, by finding ways to disappear rather than demanding to be seen and included. "No," I said firmly. "It's not okay, and I'm not going to pretend it is anymore. What they're doing isn't about age or maturity or wanting an adult gathering. It's about excluding you specifically, and I'm done allowing that to happen." She looked at me with surprise, her eyes widening slightly. In all the years we had been dealing with my family's subtle rejection, I had never been this direct about it, never called it what it was. I had always found softer ways to explain their behavior, gentler interpretations that didn't force either of us to confront the painful reality of their attitudes toward her. "But I'm tired of protecting them from the consequences of their choices," I continued. "And I'm tired of asking you to accept treatment that I would never accept for myself. You deserve better than this, and it's past time I started demanding better for you." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult and important of my life. Lily finally allowed herself to be honest about how my family's treatment had affected her over the years. She told me about the times she had felt invisible at family gatherings, the way she had learned to expect nothing so she wouldn't be disappointed when she received nothing. She shared memories I hadn't known, about moments when she had been excluded from conversations or activities in ways I hadn't noticed or had dismissed as unintentional. She told me about the previous Christmas, when my mother had given elaborate gifts to Kevin's children and Amanda's twins, carefully selected presents that showed she had been paying attention to their interests and personalities. Lily had received a generic gift card to a bookstore, wrapped in leftover paper from someone else's present. She had thanked my mother politely and never mentioned to me how different her gift had been from the others. She told me about family dinners where my father would ask my nephews about school, sports, and their friends, engaging them in conversations that made them feel valued and heard. He had never asked Lily similar questions, never shown interest in her accomplishments or her thoughts. She had learned to sit quietly during these exchanges, invisible and forgotten. She told me about the time Amanda had organized a cousin's day out for all the kids, taking them to an amusement park and posting pictures on social media of their fun adventure. Lily had only learned about it afterward, when she saw the photos online, realizing that she hadn't been included in the planning or the invitation. When I had asked Amanda about it later, she had claimed it was a spontaneous decision and that she hadn't thought to include Lily. Each story hit me like a physical blow, forcing me to confront how much pain my daughter had been carrying in silence. She had protected me from knowing the full extent of their rejection because she understood that it would hurt me too. She had absorbed their dismissal and exclusion without complaint, because she didn't want to force me to choose between her and my biological family. But the choice had already been made years ago, the moment I had promised Stephanie I would love and protect her daughter. The choice was made every morning when Lily poured my orange juice, and every night when she told me about her day. The choice was made in every proud moment, watching her perform with the school orchestra, and every quiet evening helping her with homework. The choice had been made long ago, and it was time my family understood that. That afternoon, I canceled my client meetings and picked Lily up from school early. We drove to our favorite coffee shop, a little place called Grind Coffee that had become our traditional spot for important conversations. Over hot chocolate and blueberry muffins, we talked about what we wanted our Christmas to look like, what traditions mattered to us, and how we wanted to handle my family's continued exclusion of her. Lily surprised me with her maturity and insight. She didn't want me to cut ties with my family entirely, understanding that they were still important to me despite their flaws. But she also didn't want to continue subjecting herself to situations where she felt unwanted and unwelcome. She suggested we create our own Christmas traditions, ones that centered on our little family and the people who truly cared about both of us. It was during this conversation that she said something that would stay with me forever. "Mom," she said, stirring her hot chocolate thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about what family really means. I think it's not about who you're related to, but about who shows up for you when it matters, who celebrates your victories and comforts you when you're sad, who sees you as you really are and loves you anyway." She was 15 years old, and she understood something about family that my parents, in their 60s, had never grasped. Family isn't about blood or genetics or legal obligations. It's about choice, commitment, and unconditional love. It's about creating space for each other to grow and flourish, about supporting each other through challenges and celebrating each other's successes. That evening, I sat down at my computer and began composing a response to my family's group chat. I wrote and deleted dozens of versions, searching for the right words to express what I was feeling without burning bridges I might later regret destroying. But every draft felt either too harsh or too accommodating, too angry or too understanding. Finally, I settled on something simple and direct. I wrote, "Lily and I won't be attending Christmas dinner at Golden Dragon. We'll be creating our own traditions this year. I hope you all have a lovely evening." I stared at the message for a long time before hitting send, knowing that it would trigger a flurry of responses and questions. But I also knew that it was the right thing to do, the choice that protected my daughter's dignity and honored the promises I had made to her mother and to myself. The responses came quickly, just as I had anticipated. My mother called within minutes, her voice tight with disapproval and confusion. "Rebecca, what is this about? Why are you making such a big deal over one dinner? It's not personal, it's just easier to have adults only." But it was personal, and we both knew it. If they had wanted an adults-only gathering, they could have chosen a different date, made different arrangements, found ways to include everyone while still having the intimate dinner they claimed to want. Instead, they had deliberately chosen to exclude Lily during the most important family celebration of the year, sending a clear message about her place in their hierarchy of importance. My father called next, taking a different approach. He tried to appeal to my sense of family loyalty, reminding me of all the sacrifices my parents had made for our family, all the ways they had supported us over the years. He spoke about the importance of maintaining family unity and not allowing misunderstandings to create permanent divisions. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a clear statement of values, a declaration that some members of our family were more worthy of inclusion than others. This was about my parents' inability to see past their own narrow definitions of what family should look like, their refusal to embrace the beautiful, loving young woman who had been part of our lives. For 8 years, Kevin and Amanda both sent text messages, their responses revealing more about their own perspectives than they probably intended. Kevin wrote, "Mom and Dad are really upset. Can't you just come without Lily this one time? It's not worth all this drama." Amanda's message was more direct. "You're being ridiculous. Lily isn't really part of the family anyway, so why are you making this such a big deal? Lily isn't really part of the family anyway." Those words crystallized everything I had been feeling, everything I had been trying to avoid acknowledging for years. This wasn't about one dinner or one holiday tradition. This was about fundamental beliefs about who deserved love, inclusion, and recognition. This was about my family's inability to see Lily as anything more than an outsider I had taken in, a temporary addition to their carefully constructed family narrative. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she asked me if I regretted standing up to my family. She worried that I would lose important relationships because of her, that I would later resent the choice I had made to prioritize her feelings over family harmony. I sat on the edge of her bed and took her hands in mine, looking directly into her eyes as I spoke. "Lily, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You are my daughter, my pride and joy, my greatest accomplishment. Any relationship that requires me to pretend otherwise isn't a relationship worth having. I will never regret choosing you, choosing us, choosing love over obligation." She hugged me tightly, and I felt some of the tension she had been carrying finally release from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about whether she would be included, whether she would be welcome, whether she would have to smile through another subtle rejection. For the first time, someone had chosen her first, had protected her without reservation, had drawn clear boundaries around what was and wasn't acceptable treatment. Shot Part 3. The history we carried. The days following my decision were filled with memories I had long pushed aside, moments that suddenly took on new significance in light of my family's Christmas ultimatum. As I went through my daily routines, working with clients and helping Lily with homework, fragments of our 8-year history kept surfacing, painting a clearer picture of the pattern I had been too hopeful to see. I remembered the first time I brought Lily to my parents' house, just a few weeks after she had come to live with me. She was 7 years old then, still fragile from losing her mother, still uncertain about her place in the world. I had been so excited to introduce her to my family, so sure they would fall in love with her the way I had. She had worn her favorite, purple dress, the one with tiny flowers that Stephanie had bought her for Easter, and she had clutched Mr. Buttons tightly as we walked up the familiar path to my childhood home. My mother had answered the door with a smile that felt forced, greeting me with her usual hug before looking down at Lily with what I now recognized as polite distance. She had knelt down to Lily's level, but instead of the warm welcome I had hoped for, she had simply said, "Hello there. You must be the little girl Rebecca is taking care of." Lily had nodded solemnly and whispered hello in return, her grip on Mr. Buttons tightening as she sensed the careful politeness in my mother's tone. Throughout that visit, I had watched my family interact with Lily as if she were a guest rather than a new family member. They were kind but distant, including her in conversations only when directly prompted, treating her with the sort of polite attention you might give to a friend's child during a brief visit. I had told myself it was natural, that they needed time to adjust, that building relationships took patience and repeated exposure. But now, looking back, I could see that the distance had been intentional, a way of keeping Lily at arm's length emotionally, so they wouldn't have to fully acknowledge her place in our family. They had been protecting themselves from having to expand their definition of family to include someone who didn't fit their traditional expectations. I remembered Lily's 8th birthday party, the first one I had thrown for her since she came to live with me. I had been so excited to celebrate this milestone, to show her how much joy her presence brought to my life. I had spent weeks planning every detail, from the decorations to the cake to the activities. I had invited my family, assuming they would want to celebrate this important day with us. Kevin and Amanda had both attended, bringing their children and appropriate gifts. My parents had come as well, though they had arrived late and left early, claiming they had other commitments. But it was the subtle ways they had remained outsiders to the celebration that hurt the most. They had sat together at one end of the table, talking quietly among themselves rather than engaging with Lily or the other children. When it came time to sing Happy Birthday, their voices had been noticeably quieter, their enthusiasm markedly restrained. Lily had noticed, of course. Children are incredibly attuned to these sorts of social dynamics, especially children who have already learned to be cautious about their place in the world. She had watched my family's lukewarm participation with the same careful observation she applied to everything else, filing away another piece of evidence about where she stood in their affections. After everyone had left that evening, she had helped me clean up without being asked, stacking plates and folding napkins with the methodical precision she brought to every task. As we worked together in comfortable silence, she had suddenly looked up at me and said, "Mom, do you think they would have been happier if it wasn't my birthday?" The question had caught me off guard, its directness and insight more painful than any tantrum or complaint would have been. I had knelt down beside her, pulling her into a hug as I searched for words that would reassure her without lying about what we both had observed. I had told her that some people took longer to warm up to new situations, that they loved her even if they had trouble showing it, that their reserved behavior said more about them than it did about her. But even as I spoke the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. I was making excuses for behavior that didn't deserve excusing, trying to protect Lily from a reality I wasn't ready to face myself. The truth was that my family wasn't taking time to warm up to her. They were actively choosing not to form close bonds with her, maintaining emotional distance as a way of avoiding the complications that came with fully accepting her as one of their own. The pattern had continued throughout elementary school and into middle school. Family gatherings where Lily was included but not embraced, holiday celebrations where she received gifts but not the same attention and affection lavished on my biological nieces and nephews, conversations where she was present but not truly seen or heard. I thought about the previous Thanksgiving, when Amanda had spent 20 minutes showing everyone photos from her twins' soccer season, proudly recounting their goals and victories while my parents and Kevin offered enthusiastic encouragement and praise. When I had tried to share news about Lily's selection for the regional youth orchestra, a significant accomplishment that had required months of preparation and practice, the conversation had quickly shifted to other topics. My family had offered polite congratulations, but their lack of genuine interest had been obvious to everyone in the room. Lily had handled it with her usual grace, but I had seen the way her shoulders had slumped slightly, the way she had quietly excused herself to help in the kitchen rather than sit through more evidence of her peripheral status in our family dynamic. She had learned to expect these slights, to protect herself by not hoping for more enthusiastic recognition of her achievements. I remembered the family vacation planning sessions that had become increasingly awkward over the years. My parents had started organizing annual trips for the extended family, elaborate adventures to national parks or beach resorts that were designed to create lasting memories and strengthen family bonds. But these trips were always planned around the schedules and interests of Kevin's and Amanda's children, with little consideration for Lily's school commitments or preferences. When I had suggested modifications to accommodate Lily's schedule or interests, I was met with explanations about why changes weren't possible, why the original plans needed to remain unchanged. The message was clear. The family would adapt to include some members but not others, would make sacrifices for some children, but not all children. Eventually, I had stopped attending these family vacations, making excuses about work commitments or other obligations rather than subjecting Lily to another week of feeling like an afterthought. She had never complained about missing these trips, but I knew she had noticed the photos posted on social media afterward, the evidence of family bonding and memory-making that she had been excluded from participating in. The most painful memories were the quieter ones, the everyday moments that had accumulated over years to create a clear picture of Lily's place in my family's hierarchy. The way my mother would ask about my work, my health, my plans for the future, but rarely inquired about Lily's interests or aspirations. The way family conversations would pause when Lily entered the room, as if her presence changed the dynamic in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. I thought about the graduation party for my nephew Jake, Kevin's oldest son, when he had finished high school. My parents had thrown an elaborate celebration, inviting extended family and friends, creating a photo slideshow that chronicled Jake's achievements and milestones from birth through graduation. They had given speeches about their pride in his accomplishments, their hopes for his future, their deep love for the young man he had become. Lily had attended the party and had been genuinely happy for Jake, with whom she had always gotten along well despite their family's complicated dynamics. But I had watched her face during the speeches, seen the wistful expression as she listened to the kind of unconditional pride and celebration that she had never received from my parents. She had applauded enthusiastically and offered sincere congratulations, but I knew she was also imagining what it would feel like to be celebrated in that way, to be seen and acknowledged as someone worthy of that level of family pride. When Lily's turn had come to graduate from middle school, I had thrown her a party as well, inviting my family and hoping they would use the opportunity to finally recognize her achievements and potential. She had maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout. Middle school, had won multiple academic awards, had been selected for advanced placement courses in high school. She had grown into a remarkable young woman with talents and ambitions that deserved recognition and encouragement. My family had attended her graduation party, but their participation had felt obligatory rather than celebratory. They had brought appropriate gifts and had made polite conversation, but the enthusiastic pride they had shown for Jake's achievements had been notably absent. There had been no speeches about Lily's accomplishments, no photo slideshows celebrating her milestones, no expressions of deep familial love and support for her future endeavors. The contrast had been stark and painful, made worse by the fact that Lily had handled it with such mature grace. She had thanked everyone for coming, had expressed genuine appreciation for their gifts, had been the perfect hostess despite receiving only a fraction of the celebration she deserved. Her ability to maintain her dignity in the face of such obvious indifference had made me proud and heartbroken in equal measure. These memories, viewed together, painted a clear picture of systematic exclusion disguised as polite tolerance. My family had never been actively cruel to Lily, but they had never been genuinely welcoming either. They had maintained a careful distance that allowed them to feel like they were being kind, while avoiding any real emotional investment in her well-being or future. The Christmas dinner exclusion wasn't an aberration or a misunderstanding. It was the logical conclusion of years of subtle but consistent messaging that Lily didn't truly belong, that she was a temporary addition to our family rather than a permanent and beloved member. They had been building up to this moment for 8 years, gradually making it clear that their acceptance of her presence in my life had limits, boundaries that would be enforced when it really mattered. As I processed these memories, I felt a complex mixture of anger, sadness, and regret. I was angry at my family for their narrow-minded definition of family, for their inability to see past biology to embrace the love and connection that really mattered. I was sad for all the missed opportunities, all the moments when they could have chosen inclusion over exclusion, love over tradition. And I was deeply regretful about my own role in enabling this treatment, my failure to protect Lily from years of subtle rejection because I had been too hopeful about eventual change. But I was also proud of Lily, amazed by her resilience and grace in the face of such sustained indifference. She had never become bitter or resentful, never stopped trying to connect with people who consistently held her at arm's length. She had maintained her kind, generous spirit despite receiving far less kindness and generosity in return. And I was proud of myself for finally seeing the situation clearly, for finally prioritizing Lily's dignity over my family's comfort. It had taken me too long to recognize the pattern, and even longer to take decisive action. But I was finally ready to protect my daughter in the way she had always deserved to be protected. Part 4. The Subtle Cruelties. The week after I declined the Christmas dinner invitation was filled with what I can only describe as a campaign of emotional manipulation, disguised as family concern. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, each one crafted to make me feel guilty about my decision while avoiding any acknowledgement of the underlying issues that had led to it. My mother was the most persistent, calling every morning as I was, getting ready for work, timing her conversations to catch me when I was already stressed and running late. She would begin each call with updates about her health, my father's doctor appointments, or some minor household crisis that required immediate attention and sympathy. Only after establishing this foundation of family obligation would she gradually steer the conversation toward Christmas dinner and my unreasonable decision to skip it. "Rebecca, honey," she would say, her voice carefully modulated to convey hurt and confusion. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I just don't understand why you're making this so complicated. We're not trying to exclude anyone. We just thought it would be nice to have an intimate gathering with the original family members. You know how these things can get overwhelming when there are too many people. The original family members." The phrase was carefully chosen, designed to sound inclusive while being anything but. It created a hierarchy of belonging that placed Lily firmly outside the circle of people who mattered, people who had earned their place through birth rather than love. I tried to explain that Lily wasn't too many people, that she was one person, who happened to be my daughter and therefore should be considered part of the original family by virtue of being part of me. But my mother had a response ready for every argument, a way of reframing the situation that made my concerns seem petty and unreasonable. She would remind me of all the times they had included Lily in family activities, conveniently forgetting to mention the lukewarm nature of that inclusion. She would talk about how difficult it was to plan events that worked for everyone, as if excluding one person was a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. She would express confusion about why I was suddenly so sensitive about family dynamics. That had worked perfectly fine for years. But they hadn't worked perfectly fine for years. They had worked fine for everyone except Lily, who had learned to accept crumbs of affection and call them a feast. They had worked fine for everyone except me, who had been slowly dying inside watching my daughter be systematically marginalized by people who claimed to love us both. Amanda took a different approach, positioning herself as the voice of reason. Caught between her stubborn sister and her hurt parents, she would text me long messages filled with psychological insights about family dynamics, childhood patterns, and the importance of not letting past hurts influence present decisions. "I think you're projecting your own childhood issues onto this situation," she wrote in one particularly condescending message. "You always felt like Mom and Dad favored Kevin and me, and now you're seeing favoritism where it doesn't exist. Lily is a lovely girl, but she's not their granddaughter in the same way our kids are. That doesn't mean they love her less, it just means the relationship is different." The casual dismissal of Lily's status as their granddaughter was breathtaking in its cruelty. After 8 years of legal adoption, of holidays and birthdays and daily life shared together, my family still saw Lily as fundamentally different from their biological grandchildren. The relationship wasn't just different, it was lesser, temporary, conditional in ways that the other relationships weren't. Kevin's approach was more direct, reflecting his practical nature and his impatience with what he saw as unnecessary drama. He called me during lunch one day, his voice carrying the tone he used when explaining obvious solutions to stubborn clients. "Look, Becca," he said, using the nickname he'd given me in childhood. "This whole thing is getting blown out of proportion. Mom and Dad are getting older. They want simple holidays without complications. Lily's great, but she's not actually their grandchild, and it's not unreasonable for them to want one dinner with just their biological family. Can't you just get a babysitter and come by yourself?" A babysitter. For my 15-year-old daughter, on Christmas Eve. The suggestion was so tone-deaf, so completely missing the point that I almost laughed. But beneath the absurdity was a deeper insult, the implication that Lily was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a beloved family member to be celebrated. The most painful part of these conversations was how they revealed my family's fundamental misunderstanding of what I had been trying to tell them for years. They heard my advocacy for Lily as unreasonable demands for special treatment rather than basic requests for inclusion. They saw my protective stance as oversensitivity rather than appropriate parenting. They interpreted my love for my daughter as obsession, my boundaries as punishment, my choices as betrayal. None of them seemed to understand that this wasn't about one dinner or one holiday. This was about a pattern of exclusion that had been building for 8 years, a series of small cuts that had finally drawn enough blood to demand attention. This was about my family's inability to see Lily as anything more than an obligation I had taken on, a responsibility that they tolerated but didn't embrace. The worst conversation came from my father, who called me on a Friday evening when he knew Lily would be at her weekly violin lesson. His voice was measured and serious, carrying the weight of patriarchal authority that he had wielded throughout my childhood. "Rebecca," he said, "I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing here. Your mother is upset, your siblings are confused, and you're creating division in our family over something that doesn't need to be divisive. We love you, and we care about Lily, but we also have the right to plan our own gatherings the way we want to plan them." He spoke about family loyalty, about the sacrifices he and my mother had made to build a strong family foundation, about the importance of not letting outside influences disrupt established traditions. The phrase outside influences hit me like a slap. Its implications clear, even though he didn't explicitly name Lily as the disruptive force he was referencing. I tried to explain that Lily wasn't an outside influence, that she had been part of our family for more than half of her life, that excluding her was excluding me because we were a package deal. But my father had already made up his mind about the hierarchy of relationships, about who deserved accommodation, and who should simply accept whatever inclusion was offered. He reminded me of their age, their right to make decisions about their own celebrations, their genuine affection for Lily despite the current disagreement. But his affection was conditional, offered only when it didn't require any real change or accommodation on their part. It was the kind of love that felt generous to the giver, but hollow to the recipient. The conversation ended with an ultimatum, disguised as a loving invitation. "Your mother and I would like you to reconsider your decision," he said. "We're willing to have Lily join us for dessert after dinner, as a compromise. But if you choose not to come at all, that's your decision to make. Just remember that family is the most important thing we have, and some bridges are hard to rebuild once they've been burned." The compromise offer was almost worse than the original exclusion. It positioned Lily as someone who could be tolerated for dessert but not trusted with the full meal, someone whose presence was acceptable in small doses but overwhelming in larger ones. It was a bone thrown to appease my objections while maintaining the fundamental hierarchy that placed her outside the core family circle. More importantly, it revealed that my family understood exactly what they were doing. They knew their actions were hurtful, they knew I would object, and they had prepared compromises that would allow them to feel magnanimous while changing nothing essential about their treatment of Lily. They wanted the credit for inclusion without actually having to include her as an equal. That night, I sat in my living room after Lily had gone to bed, staring at my phone and replaying all the conversations I'd had with my family over the past week. Each person had approached me with a different strategy, but they all shared the same fundamental assumption that my love for Lily was something I could negotiate, that my commitment to her dignity was something I could compromise, that my role as her mother was something I could temporarily set aside for the sake of family harmony. They had completely misunderstood who I was and what I valued. They had spent 8 years watching me parent Lily with fierce dedication, watching me advocate for her needs and celebrate her achievements, watching me build our life together with intention and love. but they had somehow convinced themselves that when push came to shove, I would choose them over her. Tradition over love, their comfort over her dignity. They were wrong. They had been wrong for 8 years about what mattered most to me, and they were wrong now about how far I would go to protect my daughter from their conditional acceptance. They had underestimated the depth of my commitment to her and overestimated the strength of my attachment to relationships that required me to betray that commitment. As I sat there in the quiet of my living room, surrounded by photos of Lily and me at various stages of our life together, I felt something shift inside me. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were being joined by something else: clarity. For the first time in 8 years, I could see the situation exactly as it was, without the filter of hope or the distortion of wishful thinking. My family had shown me who they were, repeatedly and consistently. They had demonstrated their values through their actions, their priorities through their choices, their character through their treatment of my daughter. I had been trying for years to see something different, to find evidence of love and acceptance that simply wasn't there in the quantities I had hoped for. But Lily deserved more than hope. She deserved active protection, fierce advocacy, and unwavering support. She deserved a mother who would choose her dignity over everyone else's comfort, who would fight for her worth without reservation, who would never ask her to settle for less than she deserved. The time for hoping my family would change was over. The time for protecting Lily from their rejection was now. Part 5. The breaking point. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp December air that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I woke up early, before my alarm, with a sense of purpose that felt both foreign and familiar. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Lily was still sleeping when I got up, her dark hair spread across her pillow, her face peaceful in the way it only was when she was unconscious and didn't have to worry about navigating the complicated dynamics of being wanted by some people and merely tolerated by others. I stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her breathe, feeling the familiar surge of protective love that had defined my entire adult life. She was 15 years old, smart and talented and kind, with her whole life ahead of her. She deserved to spend that life surrounded by people who saw her worth, who celebrated her existence, who never made her question whether she belonged. She deserved better than what my family had been offering, and it was past time I stopped accepting their scraps on her behalf. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, opening a new browser window and typing in the name of the restaurant where my family planned to have their adults-only Christmas dinner. Golden Dragon had been a fixture in Phoenix for 25 years, a family-owned Chinese restaurant known for its authentic cuisine and elegant atmosphere. I had eaten there many times over the years, celebrating birthdays and anniversaries and other special occasions that required somewhere nicer than our usual casual dining spots. The restaurant's website was simple but professional, with photos of beautifully plated dishes and information about their private dining options. As I scrolled through the pages, reading about their history and their commitment to providing memorable dining experiences for families and special occasions, I felt a growing sense of irony about my family's choice of venue for their exclusionary celebration. On impulse, I clicked on the contact information and found myself dialing their phone number before I had fully formed a plan. The phone rang twice before a woman answered with a warm greeting in accented English. "Good morning, Golden Dragon Restaurant. How may I help you?" I hesitated for a moment, then plunged ahead. "Hi. I was wondering if you could tell me about your availability for Christmas Eve dinner. I'm looking for a table for a family gathering. We have a few tables still available," she replied. "How many people will be in your party?" 7 adults, I said, thinking quickly. "We're hoping for somewhere around 7 o'clock. Let me check our reservations," she said, and I could hear the sound of pages turning in the background. "Yes, we have a table for 7 available at 7 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Would you like me to hold that for you?" "Actually, I said, my heart beginning to race as an idea took shape in my mind. I was wondering if I could speak with the owner or manager. I might be interested in discussing something more than just a dinner reservation. There was a pause, then the sound of muffled conversation in the background. After a moment, a man's voice came on the line, older and slightly wary. "This is David Wong. I'm the owner. What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath and launched into the most impulsive decision of my adult life. "Mr. Wong, my name is Rebecca Chen and I run a digital marketing agency here in Phoenix. I was calling about Christmas Eve dinner, but I'm actually interested in discussing something much bigger. Would it be possible to meet with you today to talk about a potential business opportunity?" The conversation that followed was surreal in its casualness, considering the magnitude of what I was contemplating. David Wong agreed to meet with me that afternoon at 2 o'clock. His curiosity clearly piqued by my vague mention of a business opportunity. I spent the rest of the morning researching everything I could about Golden Dragon, its history, its financial situation, and its market position in Phoenix's competitive restaurant scene. What I discovered was both encouraging and concerning. Golden Dragon had been a successful family business for 2.5 decades, built from nothing by David Wong and his late wife Mei Lin. They had started with a small takeout counter in Seo, a strip mall, and had gradually expanded into the elegant sit-down restaurant it was today. The food was consistently rated among the best authentic Chinese cuisine in the city, and they had built a loyal customer base that included many Phoenix families who had been dining there for years. But like many family restaurants, Golden Dragon was facing challenges. David Wong was in his 70s, his children had moved away and weren't interested in taking over the business, and the restaurant industry had become increasingly difficult to navigate, especially for independent establishments competing against chains with deeper pockets and more aggressive marketing strategies. The restaurant's online presence was minimal. Their marketing strategy seemed to rely primarily on word of mouth and repeat customers, and their revenue, while steady, wasn't growing at the pace necessary to ensure long-term viability in an increasingly competitive market. They were exactly the kind of established quality business that could benefit from fresh capital investment and modern marketing expertise. I spent the morning running numbers, calculating potential return on investment, analyzing market trends, and developing what could generously be called a business plan, but was more accurately described as an elaborate justification for the most expensive impulse purchase of my life. By the time I needed to leave for my meeting with David Wong, I had convinced myself that buying Golden Dragon made perfect sense from both a business and personal perspective. The restaurant was located in a strip of upscale shops and dining establishments in North Scottsdale, the kind of place where Phoenix families went for special occasions and business dinners. The exterior was understated but elegant, with traditional Chinese architectural elements and landscaping that created an atmosphere of refined sophistication. I arrived a few minutes early and sat in my car, gathering courage for what I was about to propose. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on me. 24 hours earlier, I had been focused on protecting my daughter from my family's exclusion. Now I was about to offer to buy an entire restaurant as part of an elaborate plan to turn that exclusion back on them. But as I sat there, watching other customers enter and leave the restaurant, I realized this wasn't just about revenge or making a point. This was about taking control of a situation where I had felt powerless for too long. This was about creating a space where Lily would never have to question whether she belonged, where our family's celebrations would never again be subject to other people's narrow definitions of worthiness. David Wong was waiting for me at a corner table when I entered, a man in his early 70s with kind eyes and the slightly weary bearing of someone who had spent decades in the hospitality industry. He stood to greet me with a firm handshake and the sort of genuine warmth that explained why his restaurant had thrived for so many years. "Ms. Chen," he said as we settled into our seats, "I have to admit I'm curious about this business opportunity you mentioned. We don't get many calls from people wanting to discuss investments on short notice. I had prepared a careful presentation, but sitting across from this kind man who had built something beautiful through decades of hard work, I found myself abandoning my scripted approach in favor of honesty. "Mr. Wong," I said, "I'm going to be completely straightforward with you. I called you this morning because I'm in a situation where I need to make a statement about family, dignity, and the importance of treating people with respect. And it turns out that statement might involve buying your restaurant." He raised his eyebrows but didn't interrupt as I explained the situation with my family, their exclusion of Lily from Christmas dinner, and my growing realization that I needed to take decisive action to protect my daughter from their ongoing rejection. I told him about my successful marketing business, my financial ability to make a serious offer, and my genuine interest in owning and operating a restaurant that reflected my values about family and inclusion. David Wong listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When I finished my explanation, he sat quietly for a moment, processing what I had told him. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Ms. Chen," he said, "in 30 years of running this restaurant, I have heard many stories from customers about their families, their celebrations, their disappointments. But I have never had someone offer to buy my business in order to make a point about love and protection. I find myself both impressed and concerned." He went on to explain that he had indeed been considering selling Golden Dragon, though he hadn't actively pursued buyers because he wanted to ensure the restaurant went to someone who would maintain its standards and respect its history. His children lived in California and had their own careers, showing no interest in taking over a business that required the kind of personal dedication that had defined his adult life. The financial realities were challenging, but not insurmountable. Golden Dragon was profitable but not highly lucrative, generating enough income to support a comfortable lifestyle for its owners, but not the kind of wealth that would make someone rich. The restaurant business was demanding, requiring long hours, constant attention to detail, and the ability to manage everything from food costs to employee relations to customer service. But David Wong could see that my motivations went beyond simple financial investment. He understood that I was looking for more than a business opportunity, that I was seeking a way to create something meaningful while addressing a deeply personal situation. We spent the next hour discussing practical matters: the restaurant's current financial position, its outstanding debts and assets, the condition of its equipment and facilities, the terms of its lease and relationships with suppliers. David Wong was remarkably transparent about both the strengths and weaknesses of the business, painting a realistic picture of what ownership would entail. The asking price was substantial but not unreasonable, falling within the range I could manage with my savings and a business loan. More importantly, David Wong was willing to stay on for a transition period, helping me learn the operational aspects of running a restaurant while I brought my marketing expertise to bear on expanding the business. But the conversation that really mattered came near the end of our meeting, when David Wong asked me about my long-term vision for Golden Dragon. I told him about my dream of creating a space where families like mine could celebrate without fear of judgment, where children like Lily would always be welcomed and valued, where the definition of family would be broad enough to include everyone who chose to love and support each other. David Wong's eyes lit up as I spoke, and I could see that my vision resonated with his own values and experiences. He told me about the many families he had served over the years, the celebrations and milestones he had helped commemorate, the role his restaurant had played in bringing people together during both joyous and difficult times. "My wife and I built this place to be more than just a restaurant," he said. "We wanted it to be a place where families could create memories, where people could feel welcomed and cared for." It sounds like you understand that mission, even though your path to ownership is quite unusual. We shook hands on a preliminary agreement that afternoon, pending financial verification and legal documentation. David Wong would have his accountant prepare detailed financial statements. I would have my lawyer review the terms of sale, and we would aim to complete the transaction before Christmas Eve. As I drove home from that meeting, my hands were shaking with the magnitude of what I had just committed to do. In the span of 6 hours, I had gone from declining a family dinner invitation to agreeing to purchase the restaurant where that dinner was scheduled to take place. It was impulsive, expensive, and completely outside anything I had ever imagined myself doing. But it also felt absolutely right. For 8 years, I had been reacting to my family's treatment of Lily, trying to smooth over conflicts and find compromises that would make everyone comfortable. I had been playing defense, attempting to shield her from hurt rather than actively, creating environments where she could thrive. This was different. This was taking control, creating opportunity, building something positive out of a painful situation. This was showing Lily that her worth was non-negotiable, that her place in our family was secure, that I would move mountains to ensure she never again had to question whether she belonged. When I got home, Lily was in the living room working. On a chemistry assignment, her textbooks and notebooks spread across the coffee table in the organized chaos that characterized her study habits. She looked up as I entered, immediately sensing the change in my energy. "Mom," she said, setting down her pencil, "you look like something big happened. What's going on?" I sat down beside her on the couch, moving her chemistry notes to make room, and took her hands in mine. "Lily," I said, "I need to tell you about a decision I made today. It's going to sound crazy, and it probably is crazy, but I want you to understand why I did it." Her eyes widened as I explained my meeting with David Wong, my offer to purchase Golden Dragon, and my plan to own the restaurant where my family had planned their adults-only Christmas dinner. I watched her face carefully as I spoke, trying to gauge her reaction to this dramatic escalation of our family conflict. When I finished explaining, Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing what I had told her. Finally, she looked at me with an expression that mixed amazement, concern, and something that might have been pride. "Mom," she said slowly, "you bought a restaurant because they wouldn't let me come to dinner?" "I'm in the process of buying a restaurant," I corrected. "The paperwork isn't final yet. But yes, essentially that's what happened." She shook her head in disbelief, a smile starting to play at the corners of her mouth. "That is either the most romantic gesture ever or the most expensive revenge plot in history. Maybe it's both," I said, starting to laugh at the absurdity of what I had done. "Maybe it's both." Lily leaned over and hugged me tightly, and I could feel some of the tension she had been carrying for weeks finally start to release. For the first time since the Christmas dinner invitation had arrived, she seemed genuinely relaxed, as if the weight of wondering whether she belonged had been lifted from her shoulders. "Mom," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder, "I can't believe you did this for me." "I didn't do it just for you," I replied, stroking her hair. "I did it for us. I did it because I'm tired of asking other people to make room for our family. From now on, we make our own room." The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations, financial arrangements, and increasingly frantic phone calls from my biological family. Word had somehow gotten out about my restaurant purchase, probably through the network of gossip that connected all the Chinese-American families in Phoenix, and my parents were beside themselves with confusion and anger. My mother called repeatedly, her voice rising in pitch with each conversation as she tried to understand what I was doing and why I was doing it. "Rebecca," she said during one particularly heated exchange, "this is insane. You cannot buy an entire restaurant just to spite your family. This is not normal behavior." But it wasn't about spite, and it wasn't about revenge, though I understood why it might look that way from the outside. It was about creating a space where my daughter would never again have to smile politely while being excluded, where our family celebrations would never again be subject to other people's approval, where love and acceptance would be the baseline rather than the exception. Amanda sent a series of increasingly desperate text messages, alternating between attempts at emotional manipulation and threats of family consequences. "You're destroying our family over nothing," she wrote. "Mom is crying every day. Dad's blood. Pressure is through the roof. All of this because you can't accept that one dinner was adults only. This is not the sister I grew up with. But she was wrong. This was exactly the sister she had grown up with. The one who had always been willing to fight for what she believed in. The one who had never been content to accept unfairness just because it was easier than challenging it. The difference was that now I had something worth fighting for that was more important than keeping peace with people who had never truly accepted the most important person in my life. Kevin tried a different approach, appealing to my business sense and my practical nature. "Becca," he said during a tense phone conversation, "you're making a huge financial mistake. Restaurants fail all the time. You're risking your entire savings on an emotional decision. This is going to destroy your financial security for what? To make a point about a dinner invitation?" But my financial security had never been about accumulating wealth for its own sake. It had always been about creating opportunities and possibilities for Lily and me, about building a foundation that would allow us to live according to our values rather than compromising them for the sake of other people's comfort. The legal and financial arrangements moved quickly, helped by David Wong's eagerness to complete the sale and my willingness to pay a fair price without extended negotiations. My lawyer reviewed the contracts, my accountant analyzed the financial projections, and my bank approved the loan that would bridge the gap between my available cash and the purchase price. On December 22nd, just 2 days before Christmas Eve, I signed the papers that made me the owner of Golden Dragon Restaurant. David Wong handed me the keys with a smile and a handshake, promising to be available for consultation during the transition period, but expressing confidence in my ability to maintain the restaurant's standards while implementing my own vision. That evening, I called Golden Dragon's staff together for a meeting, introducing myself as the new owner and explaining my plans for the restaurant's immediate future. The employees, a mix of experienced servers, skilled cooks, and dedicated support staff, listened with a combination of curiosity and apprehension as I outlined my philosophy about hospitality, inclusion, and the importance of making every customer feel welcomed and valued. "I want this to be a place where families come to celebrate," I told them, "where children are as welcome as adults, where every person who walks through our doors feels like they belong. We're going to continue serving the excellent food that has made Golden Dragon successful, but we're also going to make sure that our service reflects values of respect and inclusion." The staff seemed cautiously optimistic about the change in ownership, especially when I assured them that their jobs were secure and that I planned to invest in both the restaurant's facilities and their professional development. Several of them had worked at Golden Dragon for years, and they understood better than anyone what made the restaurant special. On the morning of Christmas Eve, I arrived at Golden Dragon early to oversee preparations for what would be my family's scheduled dinner reservation. The irony of the situation was not lost on me as I reviewed the evening's bookings and confirmed that my parents, siblings, and their families were indeed expected at 7 o'clock for their adults-only celebration. I had spent considerable time thinking about how to handle this moment, weighing options that ranged from quietly canceling their reservation to orchestrating an elaborate public confrontation. In the end, I decided on something that felt more aligned with my values: a simple, direct conversation that would make my position clear without creating unnecessary drama. At 6:30 that evening, I positioned myself at the host station, wearing a professional black dress that struck the right balance between owner and server. The restaurant was beautifully decorated for the holiday season, with subtle Christmas lights and elegant table settings that created an atmosphere of warmth and celebration. I had asked Lily if she wanted to be present for this confrontation, but she had chosen to spend the evening with her best friend Sarah, preferring to avoid the family drama while still supporting my decision to take a stand. I respected her choice, understanding that she had already endured enough discomfort from my family's behavior. At exactly 7 o'clock, my family walked through the front door of Golden Dragon, dressed in their holiday finest and chatting among themselves with the relaxed confidence of people who assumed their evening would proceed exactly as planned. My mother was wearing her favorite red dress, my father his best suit, and my siblings and their families looked like they had stepped out of a holiday catalog. They approached the host station expecting to be greeted by a restaurant employee and shown to their reserved table. Instead, they found me standing behind the podium with a calm smile and a reservation book that I had no intention of honoring. The moment of recognition was fascinating to watch. My mother's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, and finally a kind of shocked disbelief. My father's businessman instincts kicked in immediately, and I could see him calculating the implications of my presence at the restaurant where they had planned their family gathering. "Good evening," I said pleasantly, as if this were the most natural situation in the world. "Welcome to Golden Dragon. I'm Rebecca Chen, the owner. How can I help you this evening?" The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft background music and the quiet conversations of other diners who were completely unaware of the family drama unfolding at the host station. Finally, my mother found her voice. "Rebecca," she said, her tone carefully controlled. "What are you doing here?" "I'm working," I replied simply. "This is my restaurant now. I purchased it earlier this week." The implications of this statement hit them all at once, and I watched as understanding dawned on their faces. They had come to Golden Dragon for an adults-only family dinner specifically designed to exclude Lily, only to discover that the restaurant was now owned by the very person they had excluded. My father stepped forward, his business instincts taking over. "Rebecca," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to talk about this privately. This is not the place for family discussions." "Actually," I said, maintaining my professional demeanor, "this is exactly the place for this discussion. You made a reservation for 7 adults at 7 p.m. for what you described as a family gathering. Unfortunately, I'm afraid we're fully booked this evening and won't be able to accommodate your party." The lie was obvious to everyone involved. Golden Dragon was busy but not completely full, and there were several empty tables visible from where we stood. But the message was clear. They were not welcome in my establishment, just as they had made it clear that Lily was not welcome in their celebration. "This is ridiculous," Amanda said, her voice rising slightly. "You can't seriously be turning us away from a restaurant because of a family disagreement." "I'm not turning you away because of a family disagreement," I corrected. "I'm turning you away because this restaurant is a place where all family members are welcome, where children are valued, where people don't have to prove their worthiness to belong. Since you've made it clear that you don't share those values, I don't think Golden Dragon is the right fit for your celebration." The confrontation that followed was brief but intense. My family argued, pleaded, and threatened in turns, trying various strategies to gain entry to the restaurant where they had planned their exclusive dinner. They appealed to my sense of family loyalty, my business interests, and my reputation in the community. But I remained firm, standing behind the host station like a guardian protecting not just my restaurant, but everything it represented. This wasn't about revenge or punishment, though I understood why it might appear that way. This was about boundaries, values, and the simple principle that actions have consequences. Eventually, they realized that I wasn't going to change my mind, that no amount of arguing or cajoling would gain them entry to Golden Dragon that evening. They left in a flurry of angry words and hurt feelings, promising legal action and family consequences that would follow my unreasonable behavior. After they were gone, I stood at the host station for a moment, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. The other restaurant staff had witnessed the entire exchange, and I could see a mixture of admiration and concern on their faces as they processed what had just happened. David Wong, who had stayed for the evening to help with the transition, approached me with a gentle smile. "Ms. Chen," he said quietly, "in 30 years of owning this restaurant, I have never seen anything quite like that. Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," I said, and for the first time in weeks, I truly meant it. I had finally taken control of a situation where I had felt powerless for too long. I had protected my daughter's dignity, defended our family's worth, and created a space where we would never again have to accept less than we deserved. That evening, Lily and I had Christmas Eve dinner at the best table in Golden Dragon, served by staff who treated her like the princess she had always been to me. We talked about our plans for the restaurant, our hopes for the future, and our relief at finally being free from the weight of other people's conditional acceptance. As we sat there sharing a meal in our own restaurant, surrounded by the warm atmosphere of genuine hospitality and inclusion, I realized that sometimes the best way to find your place in the world is to create it yourself. The days following Christmas Eve brought a strange sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The morning of December 25th, Lily and I woke up in our own home, surrounded by gifts we had chosen for each other, with no obligation to perform, happiness for people who had never truly seen us as a complete family unit. We made pancakes shaped like snowflakes, watched classic holiday movies in our pajamas, and spent the afternoon at Golden Dragon, where I was learning the intricate details of running a restaurant from David Wong, who had agreed to stay on as a consultant during my transition period. Lily sat at the bar doing homework while I reviewed inventory systems and employee schedules, both of us settling into this new reality we had created together. The restaurant felt different now that it was ours. The same elegant decor and warm lighting, the same delicious aromas from the kitchen, but everything was infused with possibility rather than exclusion. This was a space where Lily would always be welcome, where our celebrations would never be subject to other people's approval, where we could define family on our own terms. David Wong proved to be an invaluable mentor during those first weeks of ownership. He taught me about food costs and supplier relationships, about managing staff schedules and maintaining quality standards, about the delicate balance between innovation and tradition that kept longtime customers happy while attracting new ones. His patience with my questions and his genuine investment in Golden Dragon's continued success made the learning curve manageable rather than overwhelming. But more importantly, he helped me understand the deeper responsibility that came with owning a restaurant. This wasn't just a business transaction or an elaborate way to make a point about family dynamics. This was a place where people came to celebrate milestones, to mark important moments, to create memories with the people they loved. The decisions I made about how to run Golden Dragon would affect not just my own family, but countless others who would walk through our doors in the years to come. The staff embraced the change in ownership with cautious optimism that gradually grew into genuine enthusiasm. Maria, the head server who had worked at Golden Dragon for 12 years, became my guide to understanding the restaurant's culture and traditions. She knew every regular customer's preferences, every family's special occasions, every detail that made the difference between good service and exceptional hospitality. Tommy, the sous chef who had been with the restaurant for 8 years, helped me understand the kitchen operations and the delicate art of maintaining consistency while allowing for creativity. He showed me how each dish was prepared, how ingredients were sourced and stored, how the kitchen team worked together during busy periods to ensure every plate met David Wong's exacting standards. What struck me most during those early weeks was how naturally Lily fit into the restaurant environment. She would arrive after school and do homework at a corner table, occasionally helping with small tasks like folding napkins or organizing menus. The staff adopted her immediately, treating her with the same warmth and respect they showed all family members. She wasn't an intrusion or an inconvenience. She was simply part of the Golden Dragon family. Watching her interact with the restaurant staff, I saw glimpses of the confident, valued young woman she was becoming when surrounded by people who saw her worth without question. She would chat with Maria about school projects, help Tommy taste test new menu items, and listen to David Wong's stories about the restaurant's history with genuine interest and engagement. This was what I had been trying to give her for 8 years, a place where she belonged completely, where her presence was welcomed rather than tolerated, where she could be herself without constantly monitoring whether she was wanted or accepted. I had tried to create this environment within my biological family, but their narrow definitions of belonging had made it impossible. Now, in this restaurant filled with people who understood that family was about choice and commitment rather than blood and genetics, Lily was finally free to simply exist without justification. The response from my biological family was predictably dramatic. My parents alternated between angry phone calls demanding explanations and guilt-inducing messages about how my behavior was destroying family relationships. They seemed unable to understand that the relationships had already been damaged by years of excluding Lily, that my actions were a response to their choices rather than an unprovoked attack on family unity. My mother's messages became increasingly desperate as the weeks passed. She would call late at night, her voice thick with tears, talking about how much she missed me and how sorry she was that things had gotten so complicated. But her apologies were always conditional, accompanied by explanations about why their Christmas Eve exclusion had been reasonable, why I was overreacting to a simple age restriction, why I needed to understand their perspective and find a way to move past this disagreement. The problem was that there was nothing to move past until they acknowledged what they had done and why it was wrong. Their apologies weren't really apologies at all. They were requests for me to pretend that their behavior hadn't been hurtful, to accept their treatment of Lily as reasonable, rather than requiring them to examine their own attitudes and actions. Amanda sent a series of emails that revealed more about her mindset than she probably intended. She wrote about family loyalty and forgiveness, about the importance of not holding grudges over misunderstandings, about how much Lily meant to all of them despite this unfortunate situation. But her language consistently positioned Lily as separate from the family, as someone they cared about but didn't quite consider their own, as a complication rather than a beloved member. Kevin took a more aggressive approach, threatening to involve lawyers and family mediators to resolve what he called my unreasonable behavior. He sent certified letters demanding that I reconsider my position, that I stop punishing the entire family for what he characterized as a simple disagreement about dinner plans. His legal threats were empty, but they revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what was at stake. This wasn't about dinner plans or family disagreements. This was about respect, dignity, and the basic right to be treated as a full and equal family member. What none of them seemed to understand was that their reactions were proving my point more effectively than any argument I could have made. Instead of reflecting on why their exclusion of Lily had been hurtful, instead of examining their own behavior and attitudes, they were focusing entirely on my response to their treatment. They were more concerned with being forgiven than with understanding why forgiveness was needed. But their attempts to manipulate me into returning to the old dynamic were futile. I had tasted freedom from their conditional acceptance, and I wasn't willing to go back to hoping they would eventually see Lily's worth. I had created a space where her worth was never questioned, where our family was celebrated rather than tolerated, where love was the baseline rather than something to be earned through compliance with other people's expectations. The restaurant business proved to be both more challenging and more rewarding than I had anticipated. The long hours, the constant attention to detail, the need to balance creativity with practicality, all of these demands pushed me in ways my marketing career never had. But there was something deeply satisfying about creating experiences for families, about being part of celebrations and milestones, about providing a space where people could come together and feel welcomed. Golden Dragon's reputation began to evolve under my ownership. While we maintained the high-quality cuisine and elegant atmosphere that had made the restaurant successful, we also became known as a place where families with children were especially welcome, where celebrations were handled with extra care and attention, where the definition of family was broad enough to include everyone who chose to love and support each other. Word spread through Phoenix's dining community about the new owner who had purchased a restaurant to make a point about inclusion and family values. Some people thought the story was romantic, others considered it extreme, but everyone agreed that it demonstrated an unusual level of commitment to protecting the people you love. The publicity brought new customers who were curious to experience dining at a restaurant with such a unique origin story. More importantly, Golden Dragon became a gathering place for families like ours. Families that had been formed through choice rather than biology. Families that understood that love was more important than genetics in determining who belonged. We hosted adoption celebration dinners, blended family gatherings, and community events that brought together people who had found each other through circumstances rather than blood relations. Lily thrived in this environment. She began bringing friends to the restaurant, introducing them to the staff as naturally as if Golden Dragon had always been part of our family. She helped me plan special events and promotions, offering insights about what would appeal to teenagers and young adults. Her confidence grew as she saw herself reflected in the inclusive, welcoming atmosphere we had created together. One evening, in February, about 2 months after I had purchased the restaurant, Lily and I were closing up after a particularly busy dinner service. As we walked through the dining room, turning off lights and checking that everything was in order for the next day, she stopped at the table where we had eaten on Christmas Eve. "Mom," she said, her voice thoughtful, "I've been thinking about what happened with your family, about all the drama with Christmas dinner and everything that came after." I sat down across from her, curious about where this conversation was heading. We had talked about the situation several times since Christmas, but usually in the context of practical matters like managing the restaurant or dealing with my family's continued attempts to contact us. "I think I understand now why you did what you did," she continued. "It wasn't really about the restaurant or even about Christmas dinner. It was about showing me that I'm worth fighting for, that my place in our family isn't something I have to earn or prove. It was about creating a space where I don't have to wonder if I belong." Her insight took my breath away. At 15, she understood something that my parents, in their 60s, had never grasped. She understood that belonging wasn't about meeting other people's criteria for acceptance. It was about finding people who valued you for who you were, not for how well you fit their expectations. "You're right," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "That's exactly what it was about. I spent 8 years trying to convince them to see your worth, to include you the way they included their biological grandchildren. But I realized that I was asking you to wait for something that might never come, to accept treatment that wasn't acceptable." She squeezed my hand and smiled. "I'm glad you stopped waiting. I'm glad you chose us instead." The conversation that followed was one of the most important we had ever had. Lily talked about how the years of subtle exclusion had affected her, how she had learned to expect less from people to protect herself from disappointment, how she had sometimes wondered if there was something wrong with her that made it difficult for my family to love her. But she also talked about how the events of the past few months had changed her perspective. Seeing me stand up for her, watching me prioritize her dignity over family harmony, knowing that I had literally bought a restaurant to ensure she would never again have to accept exclusion, all of this had shown her that she was worth fighting, for that her place in our family was secure and non-negotiable. More importantly, she had learned that love wasn't about accommodation or compromise when it came to basic respect and inclusion. She had learned that the right people would see her worth without her having to prove it, that healthy relationships were built on mutual respect rather than conditional acceptance. As spring arrived and Golden Dragon settled into its new rhythm under my ownership, I began to understand that purchasing the restaurant had been about more than protecting Lily from my family's rejection. It had been about creating something positive from a painful situation, about building rather than just defending, about taking control of our story rather than allowing other people to write it for us. The restaurant became a symbol of everything I valued: inclusion over exclusion, chosen family over biological obligation, love that didn't require justification or explanation. It was a place where Lily could bring her friends and know they would be welcomed, where she could celebrate her achievements without wondering if anyone would show up, where she could simply exist as herself without having to earn the right to belong. My biological family's attempts to reconcile continued sporadically throughout the spring and summer. Occasionally, one of them would reach out with an invitation to lunch or a suggestion that we meet to discuss our differences. But their invitations always came with conditions, implicit or explicit requirements, that I acknowledge their perspective and find a way to move past what they continued to characterize as a misunderstanding. What they couldn't seem to grasp was that there was nothing to misunderstand. They had excluded Lily from a family celebration because they didn't consider her to be real family. They had prioritized their own comfort over her dignity, their traditions over her inclusion. These weren't matters of perspective or interpretation. They were facts that required acknowledgement and genuine remorse, not explanation or justification. Without that acknowledgement, reconciliation was impossible. I couldn't pretend that their behavior had been acceptable, couldn't ask Lily to subject herself to future exclusions, couldn't return to the old dynamic of hoping they would eventually change. I had learned that hope without action was just another form of accepting unacceptable treatment. By the restaurant's first anniversary under my ownership, Golden Dragon had become more than just a successful business. It had become a community gathering place, a symbol of the power of chosen family, a testament to what could be built when love and inclusion were the foundation rather than the exception. Lily was now 16, confident and accomplished, with a clear sense of her own worth and a deep understanding of what healthy relationships looked like. She had learned that she didn't have to shrink herself to fit other people's expectations, that she didn't have to prove her worthiness to belong, that the right people would celebrate her existence rather than tolerate it. The girl who had once quietly accepted exclusion rather than making waves had grown into a young woman who expected respect and inclusion as her baseline. She had learned to recognize the difference between people who claimed to care about her and people who actually demonstrated that care through their actions. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after I had turned my family away from Golden Dragon, Lily and I hosted a celebration dinner for our chosen family. The restaurant was filled with people who had become important parts of our lives over the past year. Restaurant staff who had become like relatives, customers who had become friends, community members who had found in Golden Dragon a place where they belonged. David Wong was there with his extended family, who had flown in from California for the holidays. Maria brought her husband and 3 children, who had become like cousins to Lily. Tommy and his wife joined us, along with several other staff members who had nowhere else to go for Christmas Eve. The restaurant was filled with laughter, multiple languages, and the kind of inclusive celebration that I had always dreamed of, but had never been able to create within my biological family's narrow framework. As I looked around the dining room that evening, watching Lily move comfortably among people who genuinely cared about her, I realized that we had accomplished something remarkable. We had created a family based on choice rather than genetics, on love rather than obligation, on inclusion rather than exclusion. The pain of losing my biological family's acceptance had been real and lasting. There were still moments when I missed the familiar rhythms of childhood holidays, when I wished my parents could have found a way to embrace Lily as completely as they embraced their biological grandchildren. But that pain had been transformed into something positive, something that had led us to create a life that was more authentic and fulfilling than anything we could have built while trying to fit into other people's definitions of family. Lily stood up during dinner to make a toast, her voice clear and confident as she addressed the group of people who had become our extended family. "A year ago," she said, "I thought family was about who you were related to, about earning your place, through good behavior and hoping people would eventually accept you. But I've learned that real family is about who shows up for you, who celebrates your successes and supports you through challenges, who sees your worth without you having to prove it." She raised her glass and looked directly at me. "Mom," she said, "thank you for showing me that I'm worth fighting for, that our family is worth protecting, that love doesn't require justification or explanation. Thank you for buying a restaurant to make sure I would never again have to accept less than I deserve." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, filled with appreciation for both the sentiment and the extraordinary circumstances that had brought us all together. But what mattered most to me was the confidence in Lily's voice, the certainty in her words about her own worth and her place in our family. As the evening wound down and our guests began to leave, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The decision to purchase Golden Dragon had seemed impulsive and extreme at the time, but it had given us something invaluable. The knowledge that we could create our own space in the world, that we didn't have to wait for other people to make. Room for us, that we could build something beautiful from the ashes of rejection and exclusion. The restaurant had become more than just a business or a symbol. It had become home in the deepest sense of the word, a place where we belonged completely, where our love for each other was celebrated rather than questioned, where family was defined by commitment and choice rather than blood and genetics. Late that night, after the last dishes were washed and the restaurant was quiet, Lily and I sat together at our favorite table, planning menus for New Year's Eve and discussing her college applications. She was 17 now, preparing to leave for university in the fall, ready to take on the world with the confidence that came from knowing she was loved unconditionally. "You know," she said, looking around the dining room we had transformed into our own, "I used to think that what happened with your family was the worst thing that could have happened to us. But now I think it might have been the best thing. It forced us to create something better, something that was really ours." She was right. The exclusion and rejection that had seemed so devastating at the time had led us to build something stronger, more authentic, more aligned with our values than anything we could have achieved while trying to fit into other people's expectations. We had learned that sometimes the best response to being told you don't belong is to create a place where you do belong, completely and without reservation. The story of how I bought a restaurant to protect my daughter's dignity had become part of Phoenix's local lore, a tale that was told and retold in various versions throughout the city's dining community. Some people thought it was romantic, others considered it excessive, but everyone agreed that it demonstrated the lengths a parent would go to protect their child from harm. But for Lily and me, it was simply the story of how we learned to choose ourselves, how we discovered that family was about showing up rather than showing off, about inclusion rather than exclusion, about creating space for love rather than demanding that love conform to other people's expectations. As we locked up Golden Dragon that night and headed home to our quiet house, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with business success or public recognition. We had built something beautiful together, something that honored the promises I had made to Stephanie and to myself about protecting and nurturing the remarkable young woman who had chosen to call me Mom. The girl who had once questioned whether she belonged anywhere had grown into a confident young woman who understood that belonging was about finding the right people rather than changing yourself to fit the wrong ones. And the mother who had once hoped other people would see her daughter's worth had learned that the most powerful thing she could do was create a space where that worth was never questioned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right? On your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.